What's up, guys? Welcome to my new series. In this series, Black Egypt Review, we'll be reviewing all of the pre-dynastic evidence that I put on the channel, except now I have condensed it all down into chronological order. I've condensed it down concisely. I presented this information in the past. It was very disjointed, very chaotic. I decided to cut it all down into the basics, and let's get into it. I'm going to open with the Oxford Encyclopedia of Ancient Egypt, page 28. We see right here on the screen that strong connections between Nubian, Sudanese, and Egyptian material culture continued in the Neolithic culture of Upper Egypt. And other ancient Egyptian practices show strong similarities to modern-day African cultures. And it all suggests an African substratum or foundation for Egyptian civilization. The commonalities between Egyptians and tropical African cultures going back to the Neolithic is something that has been talked about for years. We see here that Ethiopians and Khoisan share the deepest clades of the human Y chromosome. This was before any Caucasian or Asian or Eurasian existed. Moving forward, when we go to about 100,000 years ago, there were already people living in Sudan. We'll be taking a look at some maps of the Nubian complex in Sudan. This was about 100,000 years ago. Sudan, Egypt, and also Arabia. This was long before they claimed African people had left from Africa to populate the world. These stone tools were left by these original humans. These people were living in the exact same locations that people are living today and have always lived throughout history. We see that they were in Upper Egypt. They were also in Sinai, Oman, and Ethiopia. This was long before Caucasians and Asians existed. It's important for us to note that. And when we take a look at these numerical ages of the Nubian complex in Africa and Asia, we see ages of up to 114,000 years ago. And the point of this section is that people have been living in these locations for a very long time. This was long before any Arab ever showed up. Their origins are obscure and we do not need to consider them for this video. So now we're going to move forward to the holocene, getting into the Neolithic of North Africa, of Africa in general. The first thing we need to note is that the history of so-called West Africa is not separate from the history of North Africa. We're going to move forward now to the holocene, getting into the Neolithic. More specifically, Africa above the equator, there was a lot of action going on. During the holocene, there were many ancient rivers, watercourses, and animals and all sorts of stuff going all across North Africa. You can learn about that in other places. And what this tells us is that North Africa has not traditionally been a barrier. A lot of times they tell us about barriers to keep us in Negro land, but that goes out the window today. For thousands of years in the holocene, people's ancient African ancestors walked across these areas, up and down North Africa, east to west, north to south. Here at the bottom of the screen on the left, you'll see the greener regions have shrunk today, but were much, much larger and went all the way up to the Mediterranean in the past. Moving forward, pottery and other technologies were being created in the Nile Valley in the east. These technologies moved from east to west to the Atlantic, and the ages of the evidence gets younger the further west you go. Here we're looking at a map of different locations of the evidence, and we can see that there were ancient populations scattered all over Africa above the equator. In particular, the Central Sahara was a heavy location of activity. Here, about 5,000 years before present, we see the evidence of the populations that were in these areas. And here we're looking at 5,000 years before present. This was long before the Sahara pushed these people to the south and to the north. It was about 9,500, 10,000 years before present that we start seeing some of the earliest pottery in North Africa, and it is found in the Nile Valley. A few examples of this pottery is from the Gilf Kabir, which is a name we need to remember. It's in the corner of Egypt, the southwest corner. Right here, Maria Gatto did a study on the most ancient pottery from the Dongola Reach in northern Sudan. We can see the ages 7,500 years before present. This is all a part of the early and middle Holocene Nubian cultural group, which of course is groups of people that they are identifying as so-called Nubian cultural groups. Again, it's important for us to note that these Nubian evidences are thousands of years older than anything called Egyptian. It was about that time that ancient African boats were being created. Here we're looking at 6,000 BC, a boat found in Nigeria. And so moving forward, the environment dictated where the people were going, and over the course of thousands and thousands of years, these people were going back and forth to the Nile Valley and other locations, and eventually as the desert started growing, people were pushed towards new areas. They were pushed to the south, they were pushed to the east, they were pushed up into the Arab mountains, up into the Mediterranean areas, and this is how we get these so-called black people in those areas. It's important for us to note that when we consider the prehistoric wanderings of ancient Indo-Europeans, there's no magical trip to Egypt included in any sort of thing. It's just not a thing. They were busy establishing Europe and all the places where they are known to be, and also in the Neolithic, Near Eastern farmers were going into Europe and teaching them farming. Here's an example of that. We see the distribution of the Germanic peoples by 750 BC. We see they didn't get very far. And when we look at other migrations, none of this is pointing to Egypt. We don't need to spend too much time on European evidence. Let's move on back to Nabta Playa. We're going to be taking a look at Nabta. Nabta is an important location that is slept on by everybody. It's one of the most important locations in ancient Egyptian history before the dynastic period. It's here that we see the earliest work of working with large stones and precise stone cutting. Here's an example of a bowl that they found buried inside of southern Egypt. They took it out of Egypt into Sudan and destroyed it. This bowl had cosmic significance. It had many megalithic structures surrounding it, radiating out from it. Here's a close-up look of this bowl. There are many calendar circles in southern Egypt. Here I have an example from Nabta where we see that this calendar circle has been mapped to Orion. There's a direct line of descent from here to the pyramid complex in Egypt. Let's not forget that the bull symbolism is very important, and the burials that are found here in the Neolithic are centered around bull symbolism. Let's not forget that in ancient Egypt, the king was the celestial bull of Memphis, and there were many cattle that were symbolically buried. I did a previous video on the stellar alignments found at Nabta. It all goes hand in hand with the Great Pyramid Complex in the future, where we see the king's chamber is pointed directly at Orion, and also the queen's chamber is pointed at Sirius, the same exact stellar constellations that can be found at Nabta in Lower Nubia. And so the complexity of their social structure had not been seen in Egypt before at this time. And we can also see for ourselves that they were very handy at stone cutting. This is a location that has been continually slept on by everyone, and everyone continues to look at Abyssinia or hanging around in Mesopotamia somewhere. But we've got to continue to look at the actual evidence that we see. Moving on, even in the most ancient of times, there was a lot of activity going on in that extreme southern portion of Egypt, especially the southwestern corner at the Gilf Kabir, which is an area that people got to get on. And let's not forget Jebel Uweinat. This was written about in Black Genesis. You can read there about Harkuf going to meet with emissaries from the kingdom of Yam in the southwest corner of Egypt. And all these trails and all these areas that's going that way are actually ancient trails from the Neolithic and probably before that. Getting back to the Gilf Kebir and Nabta, here we see that the Gilf Kebir, Nabta, and Dakhla at different times were part of the Nubian group. And in particular, Nabta at the beginning of the Egyptian group was included in the Nubian group during the Nagata period. This is very important. Here we observe this map. Each of these arrows was the directions that people were moving in. They found evidences. There's an ancient trail leading all the way to Chad from southern Egypt. And also going east to west, there's another ancient trail going east to west towards Nabta. Let's remember that these areas were green and these people were moving around back and forth in these areas. So now we have a little bit more of a background when the Oxford Encyclopedia writes about strong connections between Nubian and Egyptian material culture in the later Neolithic. On our next episode, we'll be getting into the biological affinities from the final Neolithic cemeteries of Western Egypt, Southern Egypt. Join me for that, and I'll catch you next time.